call our meeting to order. Good evening. So our goal tonight is to provide up to 3 possible combinations of strategies, which we could use to close our budget gap for public comment in January. So I think that it will be most valuable for us to present to the public some scenarios that are different from one another, so that the combinations represent some different choices and some different values, and we hear from the public how they feel about some of those different choices. So to get to a decision tonight, I actually did some work to create a starting place for our discussion, because remember that these options are not the final budget. This is not a final recommendation, right? These are just the options that we want to take forward for public comment. So when I looked at all the combinations that were proposed that I had up until the most recent one, which I didn't have when I did this, but there were some common themes that were among them. And so in an effort to get the conversation started, I took everything from you guys, and developed 2 possible scenarios using those themes. So one of the scenarios, and you'll see this in a little bit, one of those scenarios maintains funding to HSC and balances the remainder of the reductions, and the other maintains funding for a fire company and has a smaller reduction in police funding. We can take these combinations as they are, or we can tweak them. You'll see that I didn't use any one-time dollars, and so that is a difference and something that we'd want to look at as whether that's something we have a clear consensus about, or we want to get some more feedback from the community. And I also didn't include, because there was not a lot of consensus around them, some of the items that were brought forward, like Sheldon Pool, in kind of only one scenario that were sort of reintroduced to the conversation. And again, these are just options, taking the material that we've reviewed and our conversations as a committee and with the public. They're not our final recommendations to the budget. And so we will still have time, and the city manager will have time to take what we learned from presenting these scenarios to the public and work those into his budget proposal. So whatever combinations we land on will provide, hopefully, a framework that allows the public to give us some feedback on, hopefully, some kind of different directions that we could go. So before we get into those conversations, I want to give time for the people who submitted additional conversations since our last meeting to have the same chance to speak to what they proposed that those of us who did something last time had. So the additional proposals that were received were from Councillor Taylor, Councillor Surratt, and Ken. And so I wanted to give those people who submitted additional information a chance to speak to their submissions before we begin some discussion. So, Councillor Taylor, would you like to start?
Sure. What I did not want to take, I wanted to take some from the reserves. And I didn't want to take anything from sustainability or the downtown library. I guess that was true of most people. Fire station. I think mainly that's the main thing that I wanted to. There's some things I think we should not do and we can't. The reason I put, and I think a lot of people did.
Marty, you want to get the mic?
Oh.
That was the knock on the window.
Oh.
The infamous "we cannot hear you" knock.
Oh gosh.
It was either Metro TV or God.
I was thinking of some things we could change later, and some things maybe someone else could do. I think I know it's really sad to close the 2 libraries, but that's better than closing the downtown library. And I think that we need to make some efforts to talk to the school district about sharing space or sharing library services. And I guess that's all I have to say right now. Thanks. Oh, the Human Services Commission, Human Services funding. I think that's something that we can add to later if we have the money.
Thank you. So, Ken?
Thanks. I looked at the ones we came up with last week, and then I decided Thursday to put one in. and I was kind of on that same track that Laura was just talking on, that at the end of the day here, at this point, we're probably not about trying to come up with a final combination so much as coming up with something with three that are, in my mind, ought to be pretty different, and give the community, give ourselves something to kind of think about that reflects maybe where the differences are. And I think if you look at this, it seemed to me, again, kind of at a high level, where the differences jump out were under HSC, under public safety, particularly fire, and maybe under use of one-time funds. So I really just kind of using all of yours, thanks very much, I just basically put together one that I thought kind of reflected one bookend, if you will. It looks like a couple of others that are in there, although I don't use one-time funds. I tried to avoid using, touching the human services. I did take part of the fire company, and I put some new revenue in there. I think one other, Alan, had done that, and that's I don't know there would be how far to take that one forward, other than I'm thinking if this revenue committee gets convened at the first of the year, maybe just an idea that they may come up with something, just what that's intended to reflect, and if not, some of the others could be adjusted. So, again, I guess my basic idea is that we try to come up with three that are pretty diverse and reflect our differences. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Councilor Surratt.
Thank you. So I think you might recall at the meeting last week, I had said, I'd rather have some more time before I put my proposal up there, but I went ahead anyway. But in the interim, I did reconsider some of my mix of funding, partly because I recognize the fact that Fire Station 2 is in my ward. Kind of important. So I'm still working to hold the line.
What if it were someone else's?
Well, then it'd be cut. No. A number of considerations. So I didn't think that'd be a laugh line. But so I'm still committed to trying to hold the line on the human services funding. I think that's very critical to what's going on in our community right now. So I rejiggered some things, although I apologize. I think one of my numbers might be wrong. But I've increased the amount of cuts to the Equity, Human Rights, Neighborhood, and Sustainability Program. Took out the cut to Fire Station 2. I meant, I think, to put 315 for the number for the police investigations, because I was trying to work off of some of the combos that the city manager had put before us, which I assumed were blocks of numbers that represented some rational reasoning. So that should really be 315 for the rather than 320. So I apologize for that, which would add that difference to the reserve for revenue shortfall. The other numbers are the same. I increased the amount of the recreation programs partnership fee increases, and also the amount of cuts to the partnerships and CMO travel. And right now I'm willing to use the reserve for revenue shortfall as a placeholder. I do think there should be some discussion around new revenue, so if that were to be accomplished, then obviously I would look for new revenue to replace that reserve for revenue shortfall item.
Great, thank you. Do you have a process question?
It's not a process question, it's a question for information when everybody finishes their round. So
Everyone has finished that is going to speak about.
it's a quick question. It's just something that occurred to me as a counselor in this process. I like to hear what all the budget committee members are saying, get the information from the public, and then look for other sources of information before council makes a final decision on the budget. That often comes in emails to us as well, and it often comes from staff information to us over the course of time. We got, as council, an email the other day, on Thursday, that I don't mean to put my friend Sue on the spot here, but I know this is one-time monies represented here, but we had an email about City Hall funding that left me with a question about monies that I was hoping you could help shed some light on, so that we can consider it in the total budget process as well. Now, I don't want to take away from that project. I just want to know what all of the options and numbers are when we're having the city budget discussion like this. And in the email, you were talking about funding for the new city hall, where you mentioned that with an additional $3.8 million available for council to appropriate on supplemental budgets in FY14. Can you help me understand where that money's coming from? That $3.8 million?
I seem to have not brought that with me, but I'll do it from memory. Yes, so when you consider supplemental budget tonight, you'll see that there's $1.8 million that will be available for you to appropriate towards the City Hall project. $300,000 comes from additional sale proceeds from 858 Pearl. $500,000 is doing what we've done the last couple of years, which is take $500,000 from the $900,000 we would normally send to general capital and put that towards this project. And then $1 million comes from the marginal beginning working capital. So that would be $1.8 million that you would consider tonight. And then what we've said for a while is that we would have about $2 million in the telecom fund that we could use for telecom-related expenses for the City Hall project. So that's a total of $3.8 million.
I know those are one-time dollars, is how most people would discuss those, but a part of that is, it's not reserves, but monies that come through at the end of the year that are unspent. So the reason I bring that up is just one of the things I mentioned up front is about unanticipated revenues. And before we get too heavy down this road, I want to make sure we're considering all of our options, including what council will do with supplemental budget tonight. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, do you have a question as
I
well?
have a question. So I guess the idea is to boil all these down to three options for public discussion?
That is the goal.
I guess I don't understand why we would want to limit it like that, because
So here's
there's some fairly large differences.
So here was the thinking. The thinking was that right now, I don't think that the best use of the public's energy is to dive in necessarily to 60 versus 75 in a particular line. I think what is really valuable for us to understand from the community is what are the values that they think are most important for the city to look at in providing services, and what are they most comfortable with, what kind of approach are they most comfortable in combination, are they most comfortable with us looking at, and with the city manager doing further work on. And so that was the thought around, and some of these, and you'll see when I kind of share what I did with what you guys had all put together, there are some great similarities. And that doesn't mean, again, that this is the end of the game, because it's not. We have a whole process that we still will go through in the spring, but that we, instead of having two mostly similar proposals go before the public, that they then have to kind of go, well, I don't exactly understand the difference here, that we have some things that go before the public that show some potentially somewhat stark differences that allow them to comment in a way that's valuable for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I think that there's more than three.
George, use your microphone.
I think there's more than three. I'm saying maybe we don't need to limit it to three. I think that there's.
I'm hoping we can limit it to three, primarily because I think that's just really, we need to have some finite number that the public can actually absorb, and that doesn't get people tied up in knots, but instead gets them to give us feedback that's valuable to inform our process and the city manager's process. So that's going to be my goal. We'll see where it goes, and if everyone else agrees that we need to have more, we'll certainly talk about that. So why don't I, just as a next step, share with you what I did when I looked at these. I went home and spent some time with all of the ones that you guys had proposed the other day to see, are there some ways in which there are a lot of similarities in a lot of these. A lot of what I saw were some slight variations in numbers. And sort of like what Ken said, what I saw was really decision points around have some cuts to human services or have no cuts to human services, have some cuts to public safety, to fire and police, or don't have those, use one-time funds or don't use one-time funds. Those were really the three main differences that I saw when I looked at all the proposals that were here.
Say that again.
So what I saw as the, ready? Okay. What I saw were that the three kind of the distinguishing factors were, and questions were, have some cuts to human services funding or don't, have some cuts to public safety, specifically around fire and police, or don't, and have used reserve and one-time dollars, or don't. So a couple things to clarify in what you see here. Because the proposals that we looked at and that you guys provided last week, there was a complete agreement from all the proposals to not close the downtown library 1 day a week. So that was consistent across the board. And there was consistency around being willing to look at closing the branch libraries at Sheldon and Bethel. That is consistent across the board. And absorb parks maintenance and stormwater was pretty consistent across the board. Okay? So those are things that were there everywhere. A couple people had put things in here around free parking or new revenue. I did not include that here because, for my way of thinking, those are currently imaginary dollars. That does not mean that council would not make a decision, or that we would not find some additional new revenue source, or that council wouldn't make a decision, for example, around free parking. But for what we're doing today and for building the proposals that we are going to put forward to the public, those dollars don't exist. So I took those out of these possibilities. So you'll see here kind of the two options that did not really used a little bit of some kind of surplus or one-time funding, but don't rely on that heavily. So these are the two options that I really saw that kind of crystallized a lot of what I saw in your various proposals. And so I thought it might be valuable as a starting point to have some discussion around these. Want to take a few minutes and...
Just so you know, you've got two counselors on the phone.
Thank you. Other than Counselor Pryor, who else is on the phone?
Counselor Evans.
Oh, great. Hi, Counselor Evans. Thank you. Do you have this document?
No, I don't have it.
Or
No,
just
I'm
email
kind
to
of
me.
scrambling right now. I had a pipe burst on me a few
Oh, I'm
minutes
sorry.
ago, so I'm trying to pull some stuff together.
Okay. Well,
We'll follow along.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. So we have two options up here, and just really quick, as I said, one of these options has no reduction in funding for human services. The other one does at the $200,000 level. They both have some reduction to equity, human rights, neighborhoods, and sustainability, $350 versus $400. One removes the funding for fire company at Station 2. One does not. Police investigations, a little bit, more or less. And slight changes in recreation, partnerships, and CMO travel. Those are the differences. So I'm sorry that you guys can't see this, but if you have any big picture thoughts to share, please just shout out and we'll make sure you get in the queue.
You should be able to see it on the screen if they're watching on...
I think they're trying to email it to them.
Yeah, I just don't know how easy it is to see on the Metro.
Have you emailed it?
I don't think you've been able to email.
So again, our goal is really to get to some potential scenario combinations that we can put before the public for their comment. Okay, first person in the queue is Mark.
So I just have a question, and it's around your proposals for the surplus, I guess, down at the bottom. How, in moving, if, say we chose one or the other of these options, and maybe it's more of a question for the city manager, how do you propose we recommend to the city manager of how to deal with that shortfall, I guess, in this case? Yeah.
What this shows is coming out of our savings account. What I mentioned last week is the budget that I will propose will not show anything coming out of one-time dollars. It doesn't mean that's not where the Budget Committee and the Council eventually will end up. Just as, for the last 5 years, talking about one-time versus ongoing, I just feel an obligation to continue being consistent with that, but the council could end up differently. That would actually show up as it sits right now as coming out of our reserve for revenue shortfall.
Okay. Thank you.
And that was just primarily because when I added up the numbers, they got to more like 2.8 or 2.7. So, Mayor Piercy.
So just to clarify, Laura, as I understand it, you're proposing that both of these move forward for people to look at, not that you're asking people around the table to choose between the two at this point.
That's correct.
You're suggesting that these make good counterpoints for people to, make good counterpoints for people to look at.
That's correct. And then my question for the group is, are we comfortable basically with these two options going forward? And is there any desire for there to be a third one that potentially relies much more heavily than these do on things like one-time dollars? Councilor Brown.
Well, yeah, since that's an option, we should include that. We should have at least 3. I'm wondering if we shouldn't have an option that has 0 for absorbed parks maintenance and stormwater fund. 'Cause that's another option. And people are going to be asking about that. I mean, you know, if we only forward 3 options, that's fine. It's still early days yet, and then people will be able to see these, and then they're going to come up with their own combinations anyway, and they will be emailing us their suggestions, I'm sure. We're speaking at, you know, public hearings, so, but, I mean, you know, this is a good start, but I think that there should be some others that are maybe a little, I don't know if radically different's the right descriptor, but something different to give, you know, show a contrast and other choices a little more clearly, I guess.
If you have some thoughts about the particular contrast that you might propose, that would be valuable. Councilor Surratt?
Yeah, so now that I've modified my proposal, I kind of like it. In the terrible context in which we were talking, obviously. Because I think the challenge, yeah, exactly. The challenge with the 2 proposed options going out the way they are, to some extent, we're trading HSC for fire company. I mean, it kind of appears that way. So right now, I think my proposal is the only one that holds both of those harmless. No, that's as far as I see on the grid.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that would be an alternative, and as well as the fact that my proposal for uses of reserves is about the same as option 2.
Thank you. So, Councilor Poling.
Thank you. Well, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but I think the discussion of using one-time monies for ongoing expenses is a horrible idea. We've been doing it for years, and every year we say, well, maybe next year we'll get better. We haven't gotten any better. We're getting worse. So any proposal that comes up with one-time monies, I'm going to vote against. I'm going to urge everybody else to also. And unfortunately, I think it's sad that there's just not the political will around this table right now to keep the branch libraries open. Even though they don't serve the number of people that the main library does, they're a very valuable service to the community. I had to leave the meeting the other night because of a medical issue, but you know, I've done some work with some numbers of my own, and you know, there's just no way that we're going to be able to keep the branch libraries open and continue on the way we are, and that's sad because those are very important to the people. I could make some suggestions on some alternate funding for a third option, but you know, I think at this point it won't do much good. I think if once the public gets involved in it, we're going to have more than 2 options to consider. So I don't know if you want me to put those numbers out that I'm considering now, or if you just want me to wait until after the public weighs in on it and give them my opinions, or what.
So I think that if your proposal is one that keeps the 2 branches open, is that the case?
There's
Okay.
just no way I'm going to be able to do that, not without doing drastic cuts somewhere else.
Okay. So to me, if that was what you were proposing, that would be drastically different and potentially worth putting out there. Otherwise, I'm not sure it is enough different from the others.
Yeah, the only difference was I was going to be able to, with the changes that I was going to make, I was going to be able to not only keep fire company at Station 2, but also the police investigation unit, leave that whole also.
which, okay, so leave it whole as opposed to option 1, which,
Correct.
Right,
yeah.
or
Actually,
option
it's real
2, I mean,
similar
which does
to-
less.
If we go
Okay.
back to the other page, it's real similar to the proposal that Counselor Clark put out with just a minor tweaking.
Counselor Clark?
Thank you. Your option number 2 here is very, very similar to mine. It's also very similar to Claire's, except for the HSC component.
Louder, Mike.
I'm sorry. Let's try this again. It's the first time I've ever been accused of not being loud enough. Wow, okay. Your option number 2, Laura, is very similar to mine that I presented the other day with only 1 or 2 very, very minor changes, and I think it's very similar to Claire's as well. So I think, from my perspective, that's the appropriate direction for me. But and I think, you know, the difference with Claire's being that she loses another property crimes investigator or police investigator as opposed to any minor HSC changes, and one other small difference there. But I have to say, from my perspective, I would hope that we will perhaps vote on one of these 2 options. I believe you're correct that this presents a stark choice about what direction is the appropriate one for the city, whether between some of these largely similar choice patterns. As a counselor who gets to make the final decision, for me it's the process of the Budget Committee's recommendations is one of getting expert citizen advice. So I, for one, would be interested in knowing where the majority of Budget Committee was, and would like to see us make a decision or a vote on that.
May I ask a clarifying question? So to me, one purpose of doing a vote would really just be sort of a guidance, right?
Yeah.
So that you go, okay, as a counselor, I've now sort of heard around this table. However, one of the advantages of potentially still putting both out for the public is you would get that additional guidance from the wider
Where I was
body
going to
of
go with the rest of
Okay.
that was, that's something obvious that we take into consideration is that, you know, we get a good deal of public input, let's say, as we do via email, like George mentioned, around, you know, get an article in the newspaper around branch libraries reductions and get a few emails. I think we'll get more public input, and that's good. We got a good one today around leaf pickup as opposed to branch libraries. So there's good input to have, but I'd like to hear what the Budget Committee says one way or another. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts or comments about these 2 options? Comfort levels with either putting both of these forward to the public or voting? I don't know that we could, if we voted, I don't know that we would land on one or the other because they are so different from one another, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable guidance, if that would help for counselors. Ken?
I'm comfortable with what you've got here. It might be good to add Counselor Syretz as an option 3. I think what we're trying to do is put several options out there in front of the community as we go through the next couple of months of discussion. They're gonna change. We're gonna get input. We're all gonna think about it more. And at some point, we're gonna end up, the staff is gonna come back to us with one. I guess they're gonna be kind of taking all this as we do it, along with everything else as they put that final budget proposal together in the spring. We're not making a final decision here at all, and people should know that. My personal preference is option 1, but I think as I said, I think I really prefer the idea of putting 2 or 3 out there so people can really give us their feelings about some of these suggestions. So I'm comfortable with the approach.
Okay, thank you. So I have Counselor Polling in the queue again. Is there anyone else? And Counselor Brown would be a second? Chelsea. Okay, Chelsea.
I think the one option that's really missing from this is one that we don't use any reserve for revenue shortfall. I think that, for me, I'd probably vote for one that does.
Okay.
Because I think that we do have a good opportunity to find some revenue with the team coming up in January. But I think from the public, we're going to hear some folks saying, I don't want to use any more reserves. So we could take 200,000 out of a lot of places here, but I think that might be a good thing to put on the list.
So a third version that has perhaps a larger amount from reserve for revenue shortfall.
No reserve for
Oh,
revenue.
use a zero reserve. Okay, got it. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay. So next I have Councilor Zelenka. I believe you're in the first queue, and then we'll go to the second queue.
None of these actually have anything in, either of these options have anything in there.
Can you give them a microphone?
I'm going to be pounding all night.
Bare knuckles.
Thanks, guys.
Neither of these two options have anything indicated in the reserve for revenue shortfall. So that complies with one of my tenets, which is no one-time money to fix this problem. I think it's okay to have a placeholder for new revenue. I don't think that that's really fictitious. I think it's something we can come up with. There's ways to come up with some new revenue as long as it's modest and not a big number, like what we're trying to do with feet. So there's several ideas percolating that we can do that with. So I think it's okay to have that surplus be kind of a placeholder, and it could be new revenues, could be other things. If it were identified as one-time monies, I would vote no on any budget that has one-time monies in it. Secondly, I like the two options. I think the one that Claire has actually is a good one too. The only tweak I would make to hers is that I would probably lower the human equity, neighborhood sustainability to 350 and max out the police investigations one at 420. So that'd be 350 and 420. Other than that seems like a pretty good one to move forward as a third option.
Okay, thank you. So, and Bob, I have you next in the
Laura?
first round.
Laura?
Yes.
Can I just make one
Yep,
small
sure.
comment? We got the signs wrong on that. So these two
they're
options
shorts.
actually
They're shorts.
are short a little bit. So
Those are both amounts from reserve for revenue shortfall.
They're shortfall.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not identified as new revenue or
That's true,
or
yes.
RSF.
Yeah.
It's just that there's a deficit.
That there's a deficit because when I added them up, they came short of 3 million. Right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Bob.
So, in looking at our new options 1 and 2, if I had to have a preference, it would be on number 1. But I think it would be very easy to balance this budget without any shortfall monies getting put in if there was the 200,000 taken out of the HSC. And that would give you your first option that was balanced. And it also will then pretty much alienate everybody.
You would be right. What it would not do would be provide the contrast that these two proposals provide, and that there were quite a few people around the table whose proposals completely held harmless human services funding. So that's why it's that way, but you're right. That is the difference there in that shortfall. Okay, heading into the second round, Councilor Polling.
Well, although I'm not real happy with either option 1 or option 2, I think, Laura, your suggestion is probably the best way to go, because we've already heard 4 different options that people want to put out to the public. So if we put this out with just these 2 options, with the understanding that this, to the public, this is your starting point for the conversation, then we'll take it once we get the public input, and then we'll take the next step and kind of try to figure it out from there. Because like I said earlier, I've got some figures I wouldn't mind seeing as an additional option, but if we're trying to keep it as simple as possible to the public, I think we need to just keep it to the 2, with the understanding that none of us agree that this is the route that we will take. At this point, it's just our reference point to start.
Yes, thank you. That's a helpful clarification. Thank you. So, Councilor Brown.
Thank you. Well, I've come up with a third option, that reaches $3 million, but it doesn't, and it doesn't draw in reserves, but it does assume that we would have $350,000 from doing away with free parking downtown, and it does assume that we would sunset the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. That's $350,000 plus $350,000. So, and then the other figures are slightly different. Some of them, some are the same as the first two options. So, I don't know. You called it imaginary money earlier. I suppose in a way that's true, but if we included an option that had something like that, and it doesn't have to be mine, it could be somebody else's, I don't really care. It just opens up the field of inquiry for the citizens to look at, because really these two options are so similar that, it's kind of like just one option, really. They're so close. It's I don't know. I just think we need to have one other one at least that is completely different from these, or enough different to really function as another, viable choice. Whether we all at this table would agree with it, whether the citizens will like it, who knows? But it just seems like if we're going to be presenting options, we really need to present options.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Okay. I think we're back where we were a year ago, in a sense, and as I said earlier in this process, I think we're starting at the wrong end. What we need is more revenue, and I think we should have started with that instead of this. Last year we used temporary money until we could find more revenue, and now we're starting with the same old list, and I don't think that a lot of these should be cut at all, but I would like to know, I suggested leaf pickup a long time ago. I don't know how much that would cost, but I've also suggested a hotel tax, a room tax that would be, ours is a lot smaller than most places, and it would be a way to get some money from people who use our facilities who aren't paying taxes in the city. But I would prefer to say we would cut things that we can cut, and then we start working on revenue. I think is there still time to put something like a 5-year property tax levy on the ballot if we wanted to?
For May?
For May, I can turn to Glenn. My guess is probably not. I think it would be very hard just to physically get the work done and meet the timelines. Mm-hmm. And then just on the leaf collection, we spend, $400,000, $450,000, but it's non-general fund money. So if we eliminated leaf collection, we would not capture any general fund money for that.
And what about the hotel tax? How long would it take to do that?
I don't know if the council can just impose that. I don't know what the process is for that.
Thank you.
Can I go out of order to address Betty's question about the hotel tax?
Okay.
By law, if you do a transit room tax, there's a 70-10-10-10 split that money goes to, and 70% goes to the travel tourist industry, and the other 10 goes to different areas. And I don't think an addition to that transit room tax would make that much money for the city. It's the actual city funds. It depends on the, and also it's not a constant amount because of the visitor industry and the number of rooms that are rented or occupied during any given time. That fluctuates immensely, and I don't think we could try to figure our budget on that type of an income.
Thank you. So I put myself in the queue next, and then I have Councilor Zelenka. So I certainly also would, in someone who hopes that more revenue is something that we are going to be looking at in the future, so that we're not looking at cuts all the time going forward. However, the reality is that the public was presented with an option for revenue last May, and it was defeated roundly. And that is the reality of where we are. I also believe that we have additional work to do before revenue is going to be supported wide across the entire base of the city. I personally, this is a little message from me to council, but just take it as it is. I personally believe that when we do things like look at Civic Stadium in ways that we've not fully explained to the public, I believe that is going to make it harder for us to put a revenue proposal before the public again. And so I don't think that that's something that we're going to be able to tackle immediately. I am 100% behind getting more revenue. I think we need to be realistic about how soon we're going to be able to do those bigger revenue asks. I think there's some small things that we can look at, and I hope the revenue team will do some of those things. The second thing that I'll say is I have heard 2 additional possible third proposals, Councilor Surratt's, and one that has 0 reserve for revenue shortfall. And so if anyone has any comment about those as some additional possible third options, that's something that I think would be valuable to hear as well. And I've also heard some, well, maybe these are different enough in terms of human services versus not, that we could just do with these 2. So,
Laura, I can answer Betty's transit room tax.
Okay, that'd be great.
If you want. I'm just looking back at the FIT report on page 24, and what it says is that an increase in the transit room tax could be accomplished by ordinance. A vote would not be required. A 1% increase in that transit room tax would generate about $105,000 per year towards a general fund towards closing the gap. So that gives you the relative magnitude of that.
Thank you. So we wanted to be in the queue again? Okay, great. So Councilor Zelenka.
So I'm hopeful that when we do this, the shortfall doesn't come up as reserve for revenue shortfall when we put this. I think it just says shortfall. Secondly, I think all of these options, I think what we're boiling, nobody likes them. I hate them all.
Me too.
It's like which one's the least bad. That's what we were talking about before the meeting. I think it is which one do we hate the least. And then I agree that I don't want to put anything on the ballot in May. We don't have time to do that, and I'm not sure we could have anything that would be successful. But I do think there's a modest room for some revenue, as long as it's in the $300,000 range. And then the last thing, I wanted to not leave anything on the table, as other people have said. So I went back and I looked at what the opponents to the fee had said were possible things that we should do. And I listed the 7 things that were in their brochures about it. And the first one was eliminate the MUPD. That actually, we're revising that, but actually get you $0 to the general fund. The second one was end the downtown urban renewal district. We can't do that legally. Contractually, we're prohibited from doing that. The third one was end the Riverfront Research Park urban renewal district. We get about $380,000 a year. We'll have a discussion about that. So that's still on the table in terms of an alternative source of revenue. The fourth one was take the new City Hall fund and use it. That's off the table because that's a council policy not to use that. We're moving forward with a new City Hall to get out of this building. And then the fifth one was to change and this is a question for staff, change the tax collection rate from 94% to 97%. And that's what they said accounted for the unanticipated revenues, and would come up with about $4.7 million a year, they said. I think that's funny numbers, but I would like to hear what Sue, you had on this. It's not a strategy to balance the budget. I think changing the revenue collection number.
Right. I think that stems from looking at how we calculate our collection rate 2 different ways. And I did send a note out to everyone earlier because this question does come up a fair amount. So when we prepare our budget, we look at what we project what we think the tax assessor will send out in terms of tax bills. So it's the bills that go out in October, and then we try and estimate what percentage of that will we collect during the fiscal year. And that gets us to about 94.3%, which is actually how much we have been collecting over the last several years. So then the other way to look at your collection rate is to say, well, some people don't pay their taxes, some people pay their taxes in full in November, and so they get a discount. Some people, the tax assessor does roll corrections, there are appeals and that sort of thing. And so during the year, the assessor takes those tax bills that they sent out and adjusts the amount that's due downward in order to take into account those, the early payment discounts, roll corrections, and so forth. And if you look, and then you calculate your collection rate based on that starting point, you get a higher number because you're actually comparing it to a lower starting place. So that's how you get 97%. So if you look in our comprehensive annual financial report, it will say we collect 97%. But really those two are the same thing, it's just the starting place is different.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So that one really doesn't exist?
No.
Okay. And the sixth one was use the general fund year-end balance, which they said we had like $41 million in there. And we've talked about that in terms of reducing our UEFB or reserve for revenue shortfall. That's basically using one-time money again to try to balance the budget. And then the final one was change the reserve level from that's currently at about 3 months to about 2 months. And I look at the memo that Sue you put out originally on the 8th and then changed and modified on the 25th that has our general fund balance as a percentage of revenues in 08 going from 25.7% to FY12 being 35%. I think there's two things. The question is, what was it in 13? Because we used some of that, right? And then secondly, that number is not just our reserve for revenue shortfall, it's UEFB and other things included in there, so it's not really 35% that's sitting there in a reserve to use. Do I got that right?
Right, and so for your supplemental budget information that I sent out, we sent out last week, we did show you the change in ending fund balance for the general fund for FY13, and so as of FY13, you were down to 31% because we used some one-time dollars during FY13 to balance the budget. And you have done that again for FY14, right? We're using one-time dollars to balance the FY14 budget. So I would anticipate that the FY14 percentage will be yet again lower.
Somewhere below 30 maybe?
Yes.
So, because we're doing the 15 budget, right? FY15.
Yes, we're in 14 now, and we're working
Right.
on the 15 budget, so by the time you...
It's the 14-15 budget.
Right.
So, yeah, so, and there's more than just the UEFB in that general fund balance as a percent of reserve, right?
Yes, again, if you think about your supplemental budget that you're getting tonight, we have a reserve for contracts that are carried over. We call it the reserve for encumbrance, right? So that's included in your ending fund balance. Your ending fund balance for the general fund is on the reporting fund basis, which also includes the cultural services fund and the equipment replacement fund. And so those reserves are included in there, but can't some of those can't be used for general fund purposes, main subfund of the general fund purposes. So
why did it go up over time like that and then back down? I got why it went back down because we used it to plug the hole and kick the can down the road one more time. But why was it going up over that during the recession from 08 to 12, from 26% to 35%?
Right. Well, we were cutting the budget, right? So we were tightening our belts quite a bit, and you also will recall that departments were particularly in the earlier part of the recession were really underspending their budgets significantly. We're not doing that so much anymore, but we did for a couple of years have some significant underspending because folks knew that we were in major belt tightening and cutting $24 million out of the budget. So those are some of the reasons. I'd have to go back and look.
So as what it was compared to got smaller, it went up because we kept it the same. It's freaking me out that my name tag's right in front of me. I feel like I'm talking to myself. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything to add to any of that?
No.
So when I get down to it, all the things that they said we should do, we've looked at and said they're either illegal, can't do them, result in no change, or we've got a policy that is a sound, prudent policy around reserves that we're not going to use. And I think this table has pretty clearly been talking about not using one-time monies to kick the can down the road one more time. So the only one that is left to have a conversation about is the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, but that only gets us about $380,000. So I was trying to see if there was anything we left on the table, but it doesn't seem like we have.
So I have 3 people, excuse me, currently in the queue, so I'll go ahead and we'll hear from those 3 people, which is Mark, Marty, and Councilor Clark, and then we're going to take a process check, okay? So, Mark.
So in terms of some feedback on a potential option 3, I would put in my suggestion about finding one that had a 0 shortfall. I would support that. I think we've heard from multiple people that would...
Just to clarify, you mean using 0 of the shortfall?
Well, both of these options have a shortfall.
Having no surplus or shortfall.
No shortfall.
Right, no
Have
shortfall.
0 shortfall.
Which comes up with $3 million in reductions.
And I think one person...
Leaving $0 in the bank account.
And somebody threw out the option of doing that through adding a $200,000 cut to HSC, and that would pretty much get us there. So that might be the option to balance that. But also, I just want to offer input on some potential minor tweaks to option 2, and that is if it's going to be kind of bookends, is what I heard somebody use that term. I don't understand the numbers of 60 and 70 on the partnerships and CMO travel, so I would suggest in option 2 maybe raising that to 100 cut, and then option 1 maybe dropping that to the 60 essentially.
So that they're just starker?
Right. And then there was one other change I was going to suggest, and now I don't see it, but I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Marty.
I just wanted to suggest that when this committee refers the matter to the Revenue Committee, that you may want to refer 2 issues. The first being a relatively short-term, modest in scope, 300 or whatever the number you send is, but sort of a quick response on that, and also ask for feedback regarding longer-term strategies. And, those have been kicked out before. I think it's reasonable to send those back up. Those would not require immediate action, but might be useful for your future deliberations, whether it's looking at the library district or parks district or restaurant tax, or I think it's just fine to go back and look at those and take another peek. Thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, sir, very much. Regarding a third option, I would think that if we're not going to put all of these up here, the how you get to a third option is an interesting question. How you get to an equitable one that everybody would consider was a good third option. One of the things that's interesting to me in this process that I suppose I'd add for as a potential third option is different than we've discussed before, but if what we're doing is putting something out for public participation and public input for us, I'd like to suggest this. We come up with these lists of programs, and the manager makes suggestions on what he'll suggest when we get there. But these are all very, very tiny pieces when you look at the total numbers here. I mean, if you looked at the total numbers that this all adds up to, it's a very small fraction of the general fund budget.
You mean the $3 million total?
I mean the $3 million in total. We're talking about 2.2 something, right? That we're talking about here. Now, I know that in each department, and the manager and executive staff have worked very hard to economize over the last several years. I know they've worked very hard to do this sort of work, but when we're making choices about whether to cut out an entire program like the Bethel libraries or the Sheldon Branch Library or the fire stations, what we're saying essentially is, at least from my perspective, that our choices here are better than the professionals we've hired to manage these departments' judgments about that. And their value judgments about which is more important if that's the line of choice. But I'd suggest this. 2% is a very small number, and if it were left to me to decide, I would say to our managers, is there, if we gave you 2% less, what would you suggest to each department beforehand? I would think that a 2% across the board cut is an easier way to go, and I'd like to see that as option 3.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of process, it is 6:25, so we have 30 minutes in which we need to get to what we would like to put forward to the public for their comment and input, so that we can, and the city manager can then take that and use that to formulate his recommended FY15 budget. So what I've heard is we have option 1, we have option 2. I've heard people generally feel like, okay, those are good, those kind of represent some differences. And then I have heard from some people, I'd like to have one that had no shortfall at all, right? Doesn't use any kind of other one-time monies. Possible, I'd like to see something totally radically different, right? Although that sounded to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, kind of like the lapse budget concept. Is it different?
Considerably different, actually.
Considerably different, okay, so I may not understand it, okay. Or, I don't know if there was another one that I didn't capture, or having Counselor Surratt's as a third different option. Those are the 3 things I heard around the table. So right now, we need to decide, are we going to put option 1 and option 2 before the public? Are we going to put option 1 and option 2 and option X, whatever that is, before the public? And if so, what are those going to be? So the first thing I'd like to do before we figure out about an option 3, because there are a couple different ways to go with that, is I would like to hear from around the table how many people are comfortable with putting option 1 and option 2 forward as they are, one focusing more on preserving HSC funding and one preserving more the public safety functions. So that's what I'm asking for as a straw poll. So I would like to just hear, just as a poll around the table, how many people are comfortable putting option 1 and option 2 both forward with the opportunity to consider a third. So all those who are comfortable with that, please raise your hand.
Putting option 1 and option 2 out.
This is 1 and 2,
4,
right?
5, 6. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we will put option 1 and option.
Counselor Pryor said yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Counselor Evans.
Counselor Evans?
I just unmuted myself. I said yes.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Just those 2, not a third, right?
That's just those 2 at this time.
Now we're dealing
No.
with a third.
No.
Is the question, shall we just do 2 and
No.
not a third?
No. The question is, shall we do these 2 as they are? And
If they're the only 2, yes.
Okay. Then you're a no.
then you're a no.
No.
Okay, so let me repeat. So this is, shall we put forth option 1 and option 2 as they are, and then discuss as a second thing, what is the third option if we want to put forth a third option? So now, all those in favor, please raise your hand. George, now you're a no?
I'm going to go yes.
Okay, yes? Okay, great.
I will too, but that, I don't like the choice.
Okay,
I don't like
register.
It's framed better.
Okay, so we will put forth option 1 and option 2 as they are. And so now the question before us is, if we would like to put forth an option 3, which direction, what kind of option 3 do we feel best allows the public to weigh in and give us feedback on something quite different? So I have Counselor Poling in the queue. Did I see someone else? Blanca, Clark, Brown. Okay, great. So Counselor Poling.
Well, in my opinion, the other options that were discussed are just variations of one degree to another on option 1 or option 2. Although Mike's option 3, I think, is a good way to go. The 2% across the board and have the city manager come back with what that would look like. So that would be my recommendation. Otherwise, if Claire gets her option as option 3, why can't I or why can't Mike or anybody else have theirs? and we'll end up with 16 different options.
And is that something you can work with?
2% across the board. It'll look similar to what you see. I mean,
Yeah, you wouldn't do that.
for example, 2% in police is like $900,000, so we can cut out 9 detectives, but I wouldn't suggest that. So I think it's just, the gap's still 3%. I think what I'm hearing in that proposal is there are a lot of paper and pencil that can be cut, and we can gain more efficiencies out of that. We'll continue to work on efficiencies. I just think we're at a place where $3 million worth of efficiencies is not possible. And so a 2% cut, whatever that equals, it'll come back probably the same budget as the same budget, regardless of how we think about it.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add there? Okay, Councilor Zelenka?
Yeah, I don't like that idea either, because I think it's punting, and plus it's kind of assumes that there's a bunch of stuff that we could cut out that doesn't have any impact, and that's what this list is, which is the 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013 budget cuts, which amounted to like $24 million worth of efficiencies that we got and we wrung out of this system, and that's what we already did. So that was our 5% or 7% across the board cut, but it was more strategic than that. So 24 million is 3%. No, 24 million is a lot more than
Our
that.
general fund's up about $125 million, so it's about equivalent of 20%.
20%. Yeah, right. Good. Somebody's got good math. Good job. I would propose a third option that would be Claire's option with one little tweak, that it max out the police investigations and reduce the equity, human rights, neighborhood, and sustainability to 350. So it would be 350 for that and 420 for the police investigations. I guess I have a question about that, which would be, so if you just proportionally reduce that from 420,000 to 320,000, does that mean instead of 4 detectives, there's 3 left?
Yes.
So are we doing motions?
So what I'm hearing right now, so far, I just want to make sure I summarize. So one possible third option that I've heard is 2% across the board. City manager kind of decides how best to do that. The second one is potentially Councilor Surratt's as a third option with this change, because the differentiator being that it is the only one that keeps both the fire station and human services whole, right?
Right.
Okay. So at this point, right now I want to go through the queue, and then we'll see if we need to make motions or where we are. So
Put me back in the queue then.
you're in round 2. So Councilor Clark.
Thank you very much. I always appreciate this process when we're able to do this in a constructive way and we're not so small a human beings as needing to insult other people's ideas and deride them in such ways. I would see it differently, that we have a full list of people's differences, and some of them may be more subtle differences than others. But choosing one as opposed to somebody else's seems nonsensical to me, since we're going to talk that way, because what's the difference? I think there's some important differences in some of these others as well, and I don't know that particular one captures it for me.
Are you talking about Councilor Surratt's?
Yes.
Okay.
As opposed to perhaps one of the others, of the several that are listed. I would also say that the 2% cut across the board idea isn't punting, because the major thing that we pay for as a city, those of us around the table have absolutely no power to control. Only the department heads and the city manager does. And that's employee benefits and payment amount. We have no capacity to control that, and that is the grand majority of what we're spending. So by taking the approach of saying we would like department heads to make a 2% cut, we put the responsibility for savings in the hands of those who have the actual power to do that, and we put the opportunity for trying to create savings in employee compensations back on the table as an option for trimming city costs. And I think that's a very viable way to approach this.
Thank you. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. Well, I have an option 3 that I'd like to put forward, and I think that this option or something very like it should be presented because it is quite a bit in contrast to the 2 options here. So.
And is that one of the ones that's on this schedule here?
It's similar to the one. It's similar to the one, but there's a few differences in that. The one that I prepared here does not draw either on the reserve for revenue shortfall or the facility reserve.
So, I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I meant you have a proposal that was in what the staff passed out
Yes,
with
I
the
do.
10 options, and that one does use, as I see it, dollars from...
Yes, but I've just tweaked it, and it does as a different option to using that as a guide. But then I've played around with the figures a little bit, so now it doesn't draw on any reserves at all. It would be my option A or something like that.
Okay, so is it a proposal that then uses $0 in any, has no shortfall?
Yes.
And could you just really quick, big picture, what else is materially different about it, so we can understand?
I added a lowball figure. It's probably higher than this. I added $350,000, assuming that we sunset the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. That's every year. It'll just go up through time. I picked a low. I think it was 330 last year. It's at least 350. I heard Councilors Linka say 380. I'm not really sure exactly what it is. That's a substantial difference. And then I cut one more police investigator, and I cut contribution to Lane Metro Partnership and LCOG, $109,000.
Okay.
And, the reason it's different is option 1 doesn't draw on HSC funding. Mine doesn't either, and mine does not absorb the park maintenance and the stormwater fund. That's a significant difference from the other options.
Okay, so
And
instead...
there's no shortfall. And significantly, there's also no shortfall, and no drawing on reserves.
Okay, so... Okay.
It's a significantly different option.
Okay, so if we want to come back to that, we may ask you to go through your numbers specifically. Okay, so, Bob.
Thank you. Laura, thank you for your comments that you made earlier regarding the Civic Stadium and the mixed messages. That's always been a concern of mine. And to that, what Councilor Clark started off with tonight, asking questions to Sue regarding the $1.8 million of unanticipated funds and how the council might use that. It again kind of sets that mixed message that we have no money, but we have this $1.8 million, and maybe we're going to cut services and we're going to blow this on a new building. And that's a balance that has to be enacted because the public doesn't understand that. And I can't blame them because it's confusing to me, and I've been here for a year. I will put forward a totally different option because option 1 and option 2 are kind of slicing some of the same ways, the same thing. So option 3, no money from HSC, no money from equity, $700 from the fire company, $420 from police investigations, and then the bottom half pretty much stays the same. That comes out at $2,966,000. So if you're going to offer an option of partial cuts to human services and equity services, or you give them an option of cutting fire and safety, let's give them an option.
Okay, so just a very starker thing there. Okay, so I have you in the queue in second round, but we're going to have to figure out our timing, so just a minute. Councilor Surratt.
Thank you. So I wonder if we're just tying ourselves in knots a little bit, trying to keep this at 2 or 3 options, and maybe we need to consider 4 or 5, considering the conversation and considering the fact that we're trying to offer some contrast, we're trying to initiate a reaction from the public to these various proposals. If we open that up a little bit, that would let us keep the 2 proposed options, add a third with a slightly different mix, whether it's the one I put forward or the one Councilor Zelenka proposed to modify, not because it has my name on it, just because it provides some contrast. And another one that doesn't use any reserves. I think that's a really valid proposal to include as part of the mix in terms of what we're asking the public to respond to. And perhaps a version of what Councilor Clark's offered, or what Bob just suggested, again, a real contrast in terms of mix. So that's my thinking, is that we might be okay with putting 4 out or 5 out and doing it in that way. So, it's a suggestion.
So just really quick, straw poll, are other people comfortable with us going above 3 options? Yes?
No, not now.
2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Councilors Pryor and Evans, are you still on the phone?
Yeah, my response is no, stay at 3.
Okay.
I think 3 is good, and let them tweak it from there.
Okay, so what were our numbers then? Hold on.
I think you still passed.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're,
Just ask, is this a formal motion, or we just make a formal motion? Do it again.
okay, so I will move that we allow for 4 or 5 options to go forward to the public. All those in favor?
Second.
Say aye. Oh, we need a second, sorry. Thank you. Okay, got one, seconded.
Do you have the actual number?
No, we just,
4 or 5.
more than 3. So, okay, not more than 5. So,
5, exactly.
all those who are in favor, please say aye or raise your hand if you're here in the room. And I'm a no. So, okay, so,
I'm 2 and 4, 5.
yeah, so did you, Evans and Pryor, were you? No's.
I'm a no, Madam Chair.
Okay, so,
Councilor Evans.
there was a question?
Heard ya.
Oh, Councilor Evans, did you have a question?
No, he just said,
I voted no.
Oh, sorry, okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's hard to hear on the phone.
I do have a question.
Yes, what's your question?
If we come out, I'm just going to throw the number 4. And from what I've been hearing from the city manager, he's going to have his own that may or may not reflect what we have. Does his make 5? Or-
No.
Hearing.
Okay.
Not for the public hearing. For the public hearing, these are options for the public to weigh in on. The city manager will take all of those and what he hears and come up with his own proposal to us.
Or you need to finish your vote also. You've only voted for the yeses. I don't think you voted for the noes yet, did they?
I may not have because I got distracted by the question. Thank you. So all those who are no's, please raise your hand.
7.
7. Okay. So apparently we are open to 4 or 5 options. So we now have, I have 2 questions, but hold on. We now have 15 minutes to figure out what are our options that we're going to add to option 1 and option 2. So right now, what I have heard is a 2% across the board. Let the city manager kind of figure out how to make that work. No?
I said make that a departmental level decision.
Okay.
In other words, the folks who have each department
Each department
have a better
makes-
idea about the operation,
Okay.
and how they would save that 2%.
Okay, got it.
Does that mean each department has a 2% cut?
That's correct. It's
Not,
not a
it's not
lapse.
city
no.
manager goes
It's
come up
cut.
with it. It's everybody cuts 2%.
Which doesn't necessarily mean that one would cut positions. It could give the opportunity to do that in different ways.
Okay, but they would figure out how to cut 2%. Okay. The second I heard was Claire's option, but potentially with a slight tweak. Okay. And then I heard Bob's, yours was keep keep all HSC discretionary funding, all equity, human rights, and sustainability, but the full 700 cut to the fire station. And then,
420. Why not the other way around?
and then
Public safety and-
Councilor Brown, you, I believe, had something also that was very different?
Yes.
Okay, so we need to figure out, we have 4 things at least that we are considering. Chelsea, did you have another one?
I'd like an option where we don't have any shortfall on there.
Wait, that's my,
Okay.
that's what mine does.
So-
There's no sheriff.
Okay, so we need to,
You mean-
we have 15 minutes to figure out what additions we're going to add to the list. Okay? So I'm trying to breathe and figure out how we do that. Okay.
We still have a queue.
I have a queue.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and right now you are in it. Followed by Councilor Clark and Marty
And Will.
and Will
George Brown.
and Councilor Brown. Okay. Still not seeing how we're getting there, but okay, maybe I'll get it while you guys talk. Councilor Poling.
Okay, I would like to see an option that is similar to what, like I said, what Mike Clark put out in the other one. And the numbers are 250 from HSC discretionary, 645 from equity, human rights, sustainability neighborhoods. Leave the fire company at Station 2, which we heard over and over again from the public about. Leave the police investigations alone, leave the downtown library alone.
Yep.
362 from Sheldon, 289 from Bethel, 350 on the, make sure I get my line straight. Maybe if I put my glasses on. There it's better. From the Recreation Programs Partnership, 99 partnership and CMO travel, 400 park maintenance, 605 absorb park maintenance and stormwater fund, and I don't believe that any of the one-time monies are used, and it comes out to $3 million.
But you can't do 400 for park maintenance. What? Can't do 400 for park maintenance. Staff said that doesn't work like that. The math doesn't work out. It's maxed at 240.
510 is the...
Yeah.
Not if you do it with the stormwater.
Not using stormwater money.
So, Councilor Poling, is this partly your proposal for having one that uses no one-time monies?
Correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, Councilor Clark.
I agree with what Councilor Poling has said. I know that's strange and hard to believe, but true. I would say that it's important for us to either have what were kind of conciliatory option 1 and 2 possibilities. If we're going to offer a stark choice, as Bob and has been mentioned earlier, I only put the investigator cuts in there as an opportunity to try to get towards a middle ground that everybody could agree on, but I wouldn't cut that in a million years if I had the choice. So I would love to see us make perhaps starker presentations on that, where I would tend to agree with George. I would also say that there are so many other choices. I think that the 2% idea was important to me too, because there are so many other things that we're not talking about with this. While the manager's correct about the fact that there aren't any general fund monies, for example, in the leaf collection thing, it's stormwater money. So if we used that particular, we stopped spending that, we'd have more in stormwater to put more park maintenance in, and then we'd have more general fund in a pass-through sense. But I'm saying, I only bring that up as there are several other options than what we are doing here. And I hate to see us split hairs and fight so much over this. Let's put out a couple of, 2 or 3 broad options of the choices, the stark choices, and something that's more across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Marty, and then I'm going to insert myself with a process.
Sure. This is less to do with any particular option and more about the process for essentially educating the public. My suggestion would be that all these items that we have majority support for, closing the branch libraries, those sort of things, as much as we hate to do that, take those out, use those to lower the overall number, and then put an online spreadsheet or whatever that people can play with the 5 areas that we really are discussing. HSC discretionary funding, which would be fully scalable, equity, human rights, neighborhoods, and sustainability, and I'd probably limit that to the various points we've discussed about what makes sense in terms of packages. Police investigations in $105,000 increments. And then if you want to break it out in recreation programs, partnerships, and fee increases in whatever packages they want. But the purpose is really to let people play with those things. We're talking about sending these different proposals out so that people can, react to them. That's one way that people can trade things off. And, you could put a box if people want to use one-time funds or whatever. But that's a way that we can educate people about what's really on the table, where the various cut points are, and what the trade-offs are that we're looking at. And so that allows sort of a continuum approach, and we're not sort of saying, well, you have to do this one thing you don't like, or this other thing you don't like. It allows them to set their own.
So I don't
find somebody who knows how to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know whether that's something, I like it, I think it's a creative idea. I don't know whether that's something staff can do within the time that we have available.
Be ready in 4 years.
I think if people are interested in that, we'll take a look and be able to give you some info on that.
Okay, all right. So just as a, Councilor Taylor, did you have a question? Or do you want to be in the queue? In the queue, okay. So we have 7 minutes, 8 minutes. So I'm going to make a motion that we put forward, I guess, 2, 3, 4, 6 proposals to the public. The 2 options that are already up there, option 1 and option 2. Councilor Surratt's option, although I'm not sure that I completely understand Councilor Zelenka's change to it, so.
It was pretty simple, just took 100 out of human equity and put it in.
Mine is on the large sheet.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
With the correction of police investigation.
Okay, I'll just leave it as Councilor Surratt's for now. That we put Bob's in the mix that has the fire company 700,000, because that's a very different scenario. And that we include Councilor Pollings that has 0 reserved from revenue shortfall. And I don't know how, Councilor Clark, quite to represent yours.
2% across the board.
2% across the board. So that is my current motion, is that we include those, what is that, 6 options to go before the public.
With Mike's, would you put it by department, how much each of those would be?
I don't know, is that how we would represent it, or?
Good, so
I
it's
could.
900,000 from police.
Right, and it's
Yeah.
about 600,000 from fire, which is about
Yeah.
the fire company, so.
I mean, I think that's probably how you'd represent it, maybe with some kind of parentheses so that people can understand how we arrived at those numbers, so. Okay, so that was my motion, it was seconded. So, is there any discussion before we vote? Councilor Brown?
Well, I'd like to put my option up there also.
Okay, so I didn't capture your option, so if you can.
Well,
You got to throw out the numbers first.
yeah, all right, let's do that. Can you put them up there? Okay. First line is 0. HSC is 0. Equity Human Rights, 600. Fire Company at Station 2, 380. Police Investigations, 315. Downtown Library, 0. Branch, Sheldon, and Bethel, 362 and 289. Recreation Programs, 0. Partnerships and CMO Travel, 109. 255, Parks Maintenance, 0. Parks Maintenance Stormwater Fund. That should give 2310, I believe.
They misunderstood the last one.
Well, the last one's 0. That's 0. And then underneath that, 350K from Riverfront Urban Renewal District, Sunset, 350K from no free parking downtown. That should give a total of $3,010,000.
So I'm concerned, to be very honest, about putting out a proposal to the public that includes urban renewal and free parking. I'm okay with the fact that those may come before council and change something prior to the process we get to in the spring, but I'm very concerned about putting something out to the public when council has not discussed whether those are even options going forward.
Well, since I still have the floor, the idea is to get the public involved in every discussion, every possibility, the budgetary shortfall. And these, I feel that, I mean, you may feel uncomfortable. I feel totally comfortable having people discuss those options. There's all kinds of other options to discuss, too. I thought the idea was to provide a contrast here. And this is a clear contrast. It's just part of the discussion for the public. It's possible most of the public won't like that, won't like this option. You know, that's quite possible. But the idea is to broaden the range of discussion, and you know, I think that's certainly, this proposal certainly does that. It's quite a bit different from the others. I think, you know, there should probably be, I think what Councilor Polling is getting at,
I'm sorry,
there should
I'm
be
sorry.
another option for, you know, keeping all the public safety things whole, and that's another option.
And I believe we have an option that gets closer to keeping that the case, so that's a good thing. Okay, so my motion was to present, I guess these are 6 options before the public. This was probably not my original best. I'm sorry. So we would be putting forward 7 options before the public for them to provide comment on. The 7th is Councilor Clark's.
That would be the same.
No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would be Councilor Brown's, and 7th would be Councilor Clark's.
Oh, so you're including Brown's,
Well, that was not my original motion.
Right,
My original motion was 6. It included Councilor Clark's and did not include Councilor Brown's. So that is my current motion. That's right.
What is your current motion?
My current motion is that we put forth,
This.
well, except that I did not include Councilor Brown's proposal in my motion.
Okay.
My original
Your
motion,
doesn't include that.
that's correct. Could be amended, but my motion does not include Councilor Brown's in there. Right. So that is the,
Just changed it to $700 of unidentified shortfall to be determined later.
Like the other ones? Yeah, sure, of course. Surplus shortfall to be determined later. You don't have to specify.
so that is my motion right now. Okay. So let's call for the vote. So we are out of time at this point. Okay, I'm sorry, are you switching your?
Amendment too.
Yeah.
I did. Okay.
Well, I'd like to make an amendment. I'd like to have my option
Right.
included with the, you know, you can scratch Riverfront Urban Renewal District and scratch parking and say $700,000 shortfall to be determined, you know, to be made up, if that's the hang-up here. But I'd like my option to be up there also. If I get a second, I'd like to amend your motion.
Okay, so there is a motion to amend my motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Really?
Okay, so we are now, what is in front of us is the amended motion, which is basically to include all of the following up here with George's 350 plus 350, 700,000 as shortfall to be determined, right? Is that what we're calling it?
Yep.
Okay. So that is the motion before us. We are out of time for discussion, so at this point I'm going to call the question. So,
Madam Chair,
yes.
may we move to extend so that we may consider other amendments as well?
Yeah, certainly.
Move to extend for 10 minutes.
Second. Okay, all those in favor of extending by 10 minutes, please raise your hand. Councilor Pryor and Councilor Evans? Okay. All right, so that passed. So we will extend for 10 more minutes. So currently, we have an amended motion on the floor to include all of these options. Councilor Brown's, yeah. So all of those in favor of the amended motion, please.
Of amending.
The amendment.
All those in favor of
Yes, of
amending.
amending, sorry, excuse me, all those in favor of amending the motion,
allowing parks.
by allowing the 700 to be shortfall rather than those particular things. Please show your hand for aye. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed, and Councilor Pryor and Councilor Evans? No. Okay. And so all those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, so I'm sorry that does not, the amendment does not, we vote not to amend. Okay. So we are back now to the original motion.
No, I have no amendments.
Was I in the queue before? I thought I was.
I apologize if you were in the queue before. I did not have you down. My apologies. So are you asking to go in the queue?
Yes.
Okay. So I have Councilor Taylor and then Councilor Zelenka.
Okay. Thank you. I like what I think Marty said. I'm not sure, but I think, I don't like the idea of any of these options saying this is a package. I think if we've decided on certain things, we leave those, we don't even take those out for discussion. We say, if we have to cut, which of the, and list all these things that we think, that some of us think should be cut, or if we have to, and which of these things do you think should be cut, and how much? And I don't like the idea of saying, choose this package, or this package, or this package. So that's why I'm voting against it, all of them.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
So I like Marty's idea too. I don't think it's mutually exclusive though. Can we work it so that you can have a worksheet that says here's what you would, and then build your own budget, and then people could submit that to us. So that would allow us to have that. Anybody could build their own budget and provide us with that input. The second one is clarifying question about Councilor Polling's 5. My understanding is that parks maintenance, if you also have the stormwater fund, you can't, because of duplicative services, you can't get more than 240.
I don't recall the exact number right now, but there's not a one-for-one overlap. That's correct.
Right, but
I don't recall what that number is.
So do you mean that that's actually not possible to do the way he's...
Before. That's what they explained to us last week, that because of the overlap, you couldn't get all of the 510, and we asked how much was it, and they said about 240.
The mayor wants to speak.
So, could we clarify that? Yeah. I think that would change George's option. And then the other questions for the manager. But my tongue is clicking. What was with maybe Christie, you could do this. So, with Councilor Clark's option, how would you interpret that? Would you say you would take the major departments that we have and say that are in the general fund, which would be you'd have police, fire, parks, central services, and then say, okay, their allocation of 2% would be this much dollars, this much dollars, this much dollars. Is that what you're intending?
Yes.
Well, I'm a little bit sensitive to speak for the city manager, but I would assume that we would do it the exact same way that we did it when we did the 1.8% across the board by department, by general fund portion.
Within the general fund, proportional, okay. All right. And so the answer to the question about the 400,000 is, however we came up with 240, by the way.
What Kurt said is you could effectively put that parks maintenance up to the 500,000 of we would eventually refine that number, so you could have that number show up at 500,000.
It does work if you do it.
Because you're reducing different, you'd be reducing a whole different set of parks maintenance.
That's different from what you said last meeting, which was there was some overlap, and the two things didn't necessarily add up to 1.1 million.
Right, so as they've gone back and taken a look at that, the answer
is that it can be more.
Right, for purposes for this conversation, we would tweak it a little bit, but essentially, yes, you could get 500,000.
Thank you. So, Mayor Piercy.
I don't know if this is valuable in this time in the conversation or not. I just want to say that my concern is this is go out as dueling options and things will be set against each other instead of being thought out in a thoughtful manner. And I do have deep concerns about how this goes out. I don't know if it's possible, Laura, given the schedule, and I don't know if it's possible given staff's direction or all of that, but I feel that you need to take a breath.
Me personally, I agree.
I know you do. No, I'm just talking about the process. It feels like to me people are crunching down really, really and maybe taking a little breath and thinking about this could serve the body well. And I don't know if people are willing to do that. It just feels really like we've gone from one place to another place really fast, and that you've got the possibility of setting things against each other that you don't really mean to. It just feels like it would be good to take a breath and think about this a little more and not be dashing toward the end line, and be able to be a little bit more thoughtful about where we are right now before we take something out to the public that may say, did you finish baking that?
And from the staff's perspective, if we go out with 6 or 7, we haven't narrowed it down to 1 or 2, and so as we put together our budget over the next 30-plus days, so I would say we could, if you wanted to take more time and you could do something and then put it out, having 7 out versus 1 or 2, 7, there's not much detail for us to put together that budget, so we'll work based on what we've been hearing as we go. So I'd
just be worried that people will go out and sort of vie for which one, as opposed to a thoughtful process that will take into consideration everybody's thinking and try to come out with the best that we can as a community.
I agree.
So we would be able to support that if you choose to do that. We could support that.
Did I hear someone on the phone, Councilor Pryor or Councilor Evans?
Can I get in the queue real quick?
Yes. And I have you too, Will.
Am I on?
So you're up, and then Will's on.
I think that we should stick with 3 options. I think that if we put too many things out there for the public to consume, we're going to invite confusion, and people are going to look at us and say that we're not providing the proper amount of leadership in this venue. What we can do is put 3 options out there, the 2 that we've got and the Surratt compromise, and we can look at having people, give their input, bringing that input back to the budget table, and then we can come up with something that I think won't make everybody happy, but at least will get us closer to where we need to be.
Thank you. Will?
Thank you. I'm pretty much on the same page as that. I feel like we built some consensus over the past couple of meetings, and I feel like we're now diverging. And if we give the community a bunch of stark choices, we're going to get a bunch of stark responses and not actually help us build a consensus and come to a conclusion about what we want to have. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a single budget. We're not going to have 3 different budgets, so we need to give a solid single recommendation here.
Councilor Clark.
If I could, I think we suffer from not understanding our purpose with this exercise here as clearly as we might. I'm understanding that we're putting this out to the public to have a general amount of comment from the public, and from that we'll learn something about what the general public thinks, and then maybe we can have one other meeting where we clarify what we heard and what we think that means and what we think should be good recommendations to the city manager. Is that our process from here? Or is this the last meeting and we're just going to whatever after the public?
The original plan was that this was the last meeting prior to putting forth options for the public to comment on. And then, from there, the city manager would take that, what he heard.
I don't know how we would do it, but I would recommend that if what we're doing is putting this out as not a recommendation from us, but asking the community for their input. As I said at the very beginning, this committee still has to come back together and make a final recommendation before the manager does his work. I believe that's the duty of the Budget Committee, is to say, we recommend to staff and to council that this is a direction you follow. So if we're not hearing the public input and then trying to come together on some things and form a consensus, I think we've left some of our work on the table.
Thank you. So, yes, our goal in this tonight was to get some things to put forward to the public so that we could hear from them about here are some potentially quite different scenarios. What do you think of these different options? As I understand the process, which is a little different, Councilor Clark, than what you're saying, the city manager would then take what he's heard in our conversations, as well as what the public's comments on these scenarios, come back with a recommendation, at which point we would discuss that recommendation as we do every year, with options to change it, opportunities to go a different direction, et cetera. And so at that point also, the revenue team would have started their work, and they would have some things potentially to add into the mix. So that is my understanding of the process.
May I one other thing? May I make one comment?
Only if you first move to extend.
For 2 minutes.
So, second, okay? All those in favor of extending?
The reason I made the motion at the Budget Committee last year to do these meetings was so that we could come up with solutions to recommend to the manager and to council. And so I highly recommend that and it's entirely our choice to do if we'd like, we can create one more meeting as we come back from break and say, after we've had public input, we'd like to have one last meeting to say, here's what we heard, here's what we think it means, here's the direction we believe manners should go. I think we really should do that.
So we absolutely can do that. That still doesn't get us to what we want to put forward to the public. To me, so we still have the challenge of figuring out.
We voted on this, right?
No.
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 Voted on the amendment.
Voted on the amendment. My motion is on the table, which is to bring forth these seven options. No.
Seven. No, 6. You're right.
Six.
I'm
Six.
sorry.
Thank you.
You're right.
Okay. Six options for the public to comment on.
There we go.
And I move this, just to be clear, for process purposes, not because that is my desired outcome. Okay, just clarifying. Okay, so that is the motion on the table. Call the question. Mhm. So all those in favor of that, of moving forward, putting these 6 options before the public, please either say aye or raise your hand. Well, here in the room, raise your hand. 1, 2,
Aye.
3, 4, thank you. 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so all those who are opposed, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the motion passed. Oh, Councilor Evans, did you vote?
No, yeah, I'm voting no.
You're voting no.
Chris voted yes.
He voted yes. So it carries. So 8-7. So we will be putting forth all of these to the public, and I will work with the staff to figure out how we will do that. So, yes, so, is there, nope. Adjourned, thank you.